What game changed your life? What game was so influential that it changed the course of gaming forever? There are so many games out there, so many that completely changed the way we see the entire industry as a whole. From the very first Super Mario Bros. To Doom, so many games throughout history influenced the games we play today. So hi, I'm Charlie, I'm back, and let's talk about the games that changed a generation.
Elvis Presley died today.
1977. A small company known as Nintendo has teamed up with Mitsubishi Electronics to create the Color TV game. A group of consoles that all were some of the most basic games possible, with most of them just being an altered version of Pong. Nintendo was inspired by the release of other consoles like the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, and arcade games like Space Invaders. This made Nintendo look toward video games as their future. And thank God they did. It wasn't Nintendo's first foray into the video game market. That was the light gun toys that worked with the Magnavox Odyssey, the very first video game console ever, but the Color TV game was the very first console Nintendo ever made that was technically their own thing. But Nintendo wanted more. See, at the arcades, games looked better. Even Nintendo's own games that they put in the arcade were better than anything that could be made at home. Nintendo knew that the future of video games was bringing that arcade experience to your living room. And not just that, the games had to have the quality of the arcade games too. And that's what they did! Nintendo devised a plan to create a console that looked like a toy, that would almost be as powerful as the games that were in the arcade, to sell to the consumers. They wanted this console to be perfect, taking ideas from all over the place like the D-pad from their other video game console, the Game & Watch, and making it a central part of the controller. And they did it. It's the 1980s now, and Nintendo has just shown their brand new console at the Tokyo Game Show, and it's competing against Sega's SG-1000, which was the original version of the Sega Master System, and they're getting ready to release what they're calling the Famicom, or the Family Computer. And they're gonna release it to the whole of Japan with such games like Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye. And once it came out, it was successful. It outsold the SG-1000 in Japan. But outside of Japan, the rest of the video game industry was falling apart. You've all heard of the video game crash of 1983, right?
I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of that by now.
It's kind of the thing you always talk about when you talk about video games for a living. So you know what it is. But for those who don't know what it is, who is he talking to?
Them! Subscribe! The video game crash of 1983 was when all of the video games released at the time were just utter rubbish. There's no other way to describe it. My friend Gramsci always goes on about how bad E.T. was, which was of course buried by Atari in a desert because of how bad it was, but other games released on these consoles were bad too. And one of them was Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong, the arcade game, changed the generation. There's no doubt about that. From its simple gameplay to its infinite replayability, Donkey Kong, in the arcades, was incredible. And in Japan, they were getting games that looked just as good as Donkey Kong did. They even got Donkey Kong! The US though, they got this awful Intellivision version of Donkey Kong, along with other awful translations of arcade games. US consoles just couldn't live up to what there was in Japan. Nintendo once again knew that they had to redesign what they had in Japan, the Famicom, into something that would be US friendly. So they remarketed the console as a toy, making it come with Rob, a robot, and a light gun, a Nintendo classic by this point, along with a new revolutionary video game that used the main character from Donkey Kong, along with other games that showed off the toys they made. This one game, the one game that truly changed the generation more than any other game, was Super Mario Bros. Why did it take you so long to get to the point?
Well, I'm sorry I couldn't keep your attention to talk about the most important video game of all time. Super Mario Bros. Is truly the most important game. Without this game and its sequels, Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World, we truly wouldn't be where we are today in gaming. And I believe that. This game truly changed everything there is to be changed about video games. we were truly getting games that could compete with what there was in the arcade. Super Mario Bros. Changed the generation, and I truly believe that.
And I don't just mean the first game. All of the original few games changed the way we look at video games to this day. It started the video game revolution more so than anything else. Super Mario Bros. And especially Super Mario Bros. 3 changed the way we look at life. And it also helped with the creation of the revolutionary game Doom. Sir! Sir!
Yes, Bomb?
Can we finally talk about Chrono Trigger?
Fine. You know Final Fantasy, right?
Final Fantasy was the game created by the Japanese company Square. Inspired by Enix's Dragon Quest game that was released on the Famicom in 1986, Square knew it was possible to create something just as incredible as Dragon Quest. So the company took their best developers to create an A-team at Square to create the Final Fantasy series.
Final Fantasy was super successful. To this day, it's known as one of the most successful game series of all time. But if that was their A-team, what was their D-team developing?
Chrono Trigger. Yeah, Chrono Trigger. This was being developed by the D-team. It took them a while to actually develop the game. At the beginning of development, they were relying on the upcoming SNES CD add-on, which was first being developed by Sony before moving over to Philips.
The CD add-on. It just led to the point where Square kinda knew that they were gonna make the game on cartridges. And luckily by the time they knew they had to make that move, cartridges could fit more stuff on it. So moving over to the cartridge-based format ended up not really being that big a deal. Chrono Trigger finally came out and the game was received incredibly well. People loved it.
There was a lot of RPGs from around this time that truly changed a generation. Games like Earthbound, Super Mario RPG, but I really think that Chrono Trigger is the one that really changed everything. This game eventually got a sequel on the PlayStation known as Chrono Cross that was published worldwide by a joint venture between Square and EA. Yeah, that EA. And there was also some Satellaview games, but nothing changed a generation more than the original game.
Just think, without Chrono Trigger, we wouldn't have Game Theory. You ever heard of his Mario 123 channel memberships?
What the hell?
Sorry, that was barely a transition, but I needed to talk about it somewhere. This channel has 3 membership tiers, but basically the bottom tier is probably the best option. Currently we're doing commentaries pretty much every single day of this month where we're going through so many videos that I've made and I'm telling you all the behind the scenes details about it. So if you want to watch that you can if you become a first tier member. Anyway, I think it's time to talk about id Software. You know, the B plot of this video.
Let's take it back to the release of Super Mario Bros. 3.
Oh god, not again. At least my background didn't change this time.
People loved Super Mario Bros. 3, and 2 of those people were John Carmack and Tom Hall. They loved it so much in fact that they decided to remake the entire first level of Super Mario Bros. 3, and the third member of John and Tom's friend group, John Romero, saw the little demo they made and loved it. So they decided to make a larger version of the demo, creating a PC version of Super Mario Bros. 3, and thought it would be a good idea to send it to Nintendo.
Why the hell would you do that? You know Nintendo's history. Oh yeah, September 1990.
Nintendo thought the demo was very impressive, but they didn't want to have Mario appear on any other platform that wasn't a Nintendo platform. Super Mario Bros. Print World for MS-DOS was released in March 1991. I don't think they had that much of a problem.
Obviously, having the entirety of Super Mario Bros. 3 is a bit different to having Super Mario Bros. Print World on PC. Super Mario Bros. 3 is an entire game. Super Mario Bros. Print World is like Mario Paint. But there being an official Super Mario Bros. 3 PC port probably would have been quite cool.
This port though inspired the creation of a series they created called Commander Keen, with the first game releasing in December 1990 known as Commander Keen in Invasion of the Vorticons. They continued creating Commander Keen, but the more and more they went on, the more and more they got bored of the platformer genre. It just wasn't hitting the same as the big guys like Mario and the Blue Blur on the Sega Mega Drive, so they knew they needed something to reinvent what they were doing as a company. The guys left the company they were working at, Apogee, and created their own company alongside Adrian Carmack, who isn't related to John Carmack whatsoever. The Wikipedia article makes it very known. This company then led the change on a brand new game called Wolfenstein 3D. A sequel to an almost completely different game called Return to Castle Wolfenstein, which was a game that they stuffed up the copyright while making it, so it was technically in the public domain. And Wolfenstein 3D was incredible. Really, it was. It became one of the top PC games in 1992, and even came to home consoles like the SNES, which Nintendo had to censor, of course, and helped inspire the creation of something even better. Doom! There's not really that much to be said about Doom that I haven't already said about Wolfenstein 3D, but it's well known that Doom led the generation into the future. I said the future! There we go. The engine that id Software created for Doom absolutely changed gaming forever. This was one of the very few times that the engine for the game and the game itself weren't developed as one. So having the engine be its own separate thing allowed for the community to do literally whatever they wanted with the game. Without Doom, we wouldn't have what we have today, and we certainly wouldn't have had id's next big game, Quake. id Software always wanted to be at the forefront of the future of gaming. Beat all the competition and be the best in technical innovation. They knew they needed to completely reinvent what Doom was. This time, they were going to use 3D environments, 3D models, and really focus on the technology behind the game, more so than the game itself. They wanted this game to basically be the ultimate video game, and it kinda worked. Once Quake came out on June 21st, 1996, it inspired so many new developers. It led to the creation of a mod known as Team Fortress, and it also led to the creation of an engine known as Gold Source. Although the story of Quake may have been a bit rushed, and the art style was all over the place, Quake's incredible behind-the-scenes workings within the Quake engine led it to be one of the biggest games of all time. So do you want to know what came out the next day? How the hell did this happen? Let's take it back a bit. Star Fox for the Super Nintendo had just come out, and it was one of the first few games to use 3D graphics on the console. Shigeru Miyamoto was mesmerized by this. Not did he ever think it would be physically possible to do these types of graphics on the SNES. But right there, in a game published by Nintendo, the 3D graphics were possible. After seeing this, Shigeru Miyamoto went to work on a Super Mario game in 3D for the Super Nintendo. He always had this dream of creating a miniature world that you can play around in, but he genuinely thought that this was just never possible. But look at Star Fox. They just did that. It's now possible. But when trying to develop the game, the SNES controller actually made it difficult to come up with a good working 3D Mario game. So development moved over to the newly in development Nintendo 64. Super Mario 64 was eventually released on June 22nd, 1996, and the game changed the video game industry forever, just like the game that released the day before. Games like Spyro, Crash Bandicoot, Banjo-Kazooie, and more all wouldn't have been as good without Super Mario 64 coming out and showing what a 3D platformer could do. It may have not been the very first 3D platformer ever created, but Super Mario 64 changed a generation of video games, and it also changed a generation when they first played it. Super Mario 64 had 120 stars, 120 goals, which is crazy! Super Mario 64 was one of the biggest games at the time, and there was always something to explore while playing. Every single part of the game just had so much to do! Super Mario 64 was one of the most loved games of all time, at least at the time. And even playing the game now, even though the camera isn't all that fantastic, the game is still incredible. The game just works so damn well. Super Mario 64 is such a powerful game that not only did it change a generation when the game came out, but as people continue to play it as time goes on, it still changes a generation. I remember playing Super Mario 64 for the first time, exploring Peach's castle, everything outside of it, Bob-omb Battlefield. Super Mario 64 was just so much fun. We get it, Charlie. You think all of these games changed a generation.
Oh, but there's so much more! Final Fantasy VII, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Mario Galaxy, Half-Life, there's so many!
Yeah, but I feel like you've been going on for too long. You gotta wrap it up. It's almost lunchtime.
You're right. Video games changed the generation. But that's what all forms of media do. Other movies completely change people. Films like Back to the Future, Star Wars, The Avengers, Snow White, whatever it is. Media can completely change someone's perspective on life for the better. But something you may have noticed is that everything I mentioned is from at least 10 years ago, if not more. It really makes you question, is art dead? Is everything we know about art dead? Was Bo Burnham right? Well, you gotta stay tuned for that one.
I think Back to the Future really changed me. I love that movie.
I'm a huge fan of Star Wars, personally. What do you think, Luigi? Great.